Ah, China, the land of ancient dynasties, groundbreaking inventions, and a leader who somehow banned a cartoon bear. Truly a nation of innovation. Also, the only place where you can buy a chair, a phone, and a set of screwdrivers for $5, and none of them will last a week. But, before China became the economic powerhouse that sends shivers down the spines of Western policymakers, it was just a collection of Neolithic villages where people looked up at the stars and probably wondered if those strange fireballs in the sky were UFOs from some distant galaxy. Little did they know they were on the brink of laying the groundwork for one of the most enduring civilizations in human history. The earliest dynasty, the Xia dynasty circa 2100 BCE, is a bit of a mystery. Some historians say it was real, but there's about as much evidence for the Xia as there is for Bigfoot. We can only conclude that these early folks had excellent PR skills because they've been immortalized as the first. But let's be real, it's probably more legend than fact, just like how every great empire loves to say, "We were first." Next came the Shang dynasty circa 1600 BCE, 1046 BCE, and they didn't mess around. They left us evidence of their existence, bronze artifacts, oracle bones, and an incredible penchant for ancestor worship. If you were one of the elite in Shang society, you probably consulted turtle shells to figure out what the heavens had planned for you today. Need a decision on whether to invade a neighboring tribe? Throw a turtle on the fire and see what its cracks have to say about it. It's essentially China's first version of Google, except slower and a lot more spiritual. The Shang gave way to the Zhou dynasty, 1046 BCE, 256 BCE, who took the throne with a cool new idea, the mandate of heaven. This divine decree told everyone that the emperor ruled with heavenly approval, until the day it didn't. The mandate of heaven was the ancient version of a free pass to do whatever you wanted. Heaven's favor could be yanked away faster than a bad Tinder date, especially if you happen to lose a few battles or let corruption get out of hand. With it came centuries of political drama, and the Zhou, well, they're a textbook example of a government that was way ahead of its time. The creation of the mandate of heaven wasn't just a clever political stunt, it was the Chinese equivalent of saying, hey, if things go wrong, it's not my fault, it's because heaven's been capricious today. It's like the ancient version of it's not you, it's me, except with a cosmic twist. And just when you thought things couldn't get more chaotic, enter the Warring States period. This era of constant fighting and bloody power struggles would make Game of Thrones look like a high school drama. It was the age of ruthless backstabbing, betrayal, and warfare that often resembled the Hunger Games, except without any of the luxury sponsorships. Every state had its ambitions, and nobody trusted anyone else. It was like the ultimate reality show, but with fewer sparkly dresses and much more blood. Enter Qin Shi Huang R, 221 BCE, 210 BCE, the first emperor who had absolutely had it with all the drama. He unified China, crushing his rivals and declaring himself the emperor in a move that would make even the most ambitious dictators jealous. But he didn't stop at just ruling. He thought, I'll standardize everything. Currency, weights, measurements, even writing. Efficiency became his mantra. Why not? He mused. Let's make everything as uniform as possible. Of course, one of his more famous projects was a bit less about efficiency and more about his ego, the Great Wall of China. Sure, it was meant to keep out nomadic invaders, but it ended up being one of the world's most iconic tourist traps long before anyone even knew what tourism was. Imagine being a nomadic invader on horseback, having to scale a 21,000-kilometer wall just to pillage some rice paddies. Definitely an inconvenience. Qin's obsession with immortality led him to seek out an elixir that would grant him eternal life. Unfortunately, he didn't have the best researchers on his team, and he ended up ingesting mercury. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly help him live forever. In fact, it probably sped up his demise. Ironically, he probably could have lived longer just by taking a nap and some vitamin D. If the Qin dynasty were about fear and totalitarian rule, the Han dynasty, 206 BCE, 220 CE, ushered in a new golden age for China. Founded by Liu Bang, a former peasant, the Han dynasty had a far more pragmatic approach to governance. During this period, China saw a golden age of trade, culture, and technological advancements that would set the tone for centuries to come. The Silk Road became a vital part of China's trade network, connecting China to far-off lands like Rome and Central Asia. Think of it as the ancient Amazon, except with less prime shipping and more caravans. The Han also embraced Confucianism, making it the foundation of their government, which might not sound exciting, but it helped keep things running smoothly. The bureaucracy expanded rapidly, and civil servants were trained in Confucian texts. It was like the ancient Chinese version of The Office, only with more philosophical debate and less paper shuffling. In terms of technological progress, the Han were real pioneers. They invented paper, take that Egyptians, made great strides in medicine, and expanded their knowledge of astronomy. Emperor Wu, R. 141 BCE, 87 BCE, even expanded China's borders to their greatest extent, solidifying China's position as a regional powerhouse. But, as is the fate of all empires, internal corruption and political infighting started to take their toll, and the Han eventually fractured into the Three Kingdoms period, an era of warlords, rebellion, and backstabbing worthy of a Netflix series. After centuries of division, the Sui dynasty, 500 681 to 618 CE, finally tried to unite China. They constructed the Grand Canal, an engineering marvel that connected China's north and south regions. It was ambitious, impressive, and really expensive. So expensive, in fact, that it drained the imperial coffers, leading to rebellions and the eventual collapse of the Sui. But then came the Tang Dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, which is considered one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. During this period, China became a thriving hub of culture, politics, and innovation. The capital, Chang'an, was the largest city in the world and a melting pot of diverse cultures. It was like New York City, but with more silk and fewer food trucks. Emperors like Taizong were visionary, expanding China's borders even further and solidifying the empire's dominance. And the poetry, oh the poetry! Li Bai and Du Fu are just two of the poets whose works have endured for centuries, making Instagram poetry look like a pale imitation of the deep evocative verses written during this era. But all was not well in the imperial court. Emperor Xuanzong's obsession with his favorite concubine led to political instability, rebellion, and chaos. Because why worry about the empire when you can have a love affair that lasts generations? Her name was Yang Guifei, legendary for her beauty, infamous for her influence. She had actually been married to Xuanzong's own son at one point, but scandal wasn't a problem when you had enough silk and incense, so they quietly packed her off to a Taoist nunnery to let things cool off before summoning her back as the emperor's official consort. What followed was a lavish romance at the heart of a crumbling dynasty. Her relatives were promoted at lightning speed, corrupting the court like rot in an old scroll. When the Anlushan rebellion broke out in 755 CE, it wasn't just a military crisis, it was personal. As Emperor Xuanzong's forces retreated, his own guards demanded Yang Guifei be executed for her part in the empire's unraveling, so, under pressure, the emperor let her be strangled, one of the most tragic endings in imperial romance. The Tang limped on for another century or so, but the golden age was over, and after a brief pit stop through the chaotic 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms, China was ready for something new. Enter the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279 CE. If the Tang were all about poetry and expansion, the Song were more like, let's just stay inside and invent stuff. And invent they did. Gunpowder, movable type printing, paper money, even compasses for all your unplanned maritime detours. It was basically a tech startup era, minus the hoodies. But as smart as the Song were, they weren't exactly battlefield material. Defending northern China? Yeah, not their strong suit. The urchins rolled in, took half the empire, and the southern Song spent the rest of their days perfecting tea culture while praying no one else showed up with a horse. Unfortunately, their prayers went unanswered, because crashing through the Great Wall came the Mongols, and they weren't sending diplomats. Led by Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan himself, the Mongol invasion made the urchins look like an opening act. The Song resisted, but let's face it, by then their military was about as threatening as a scholar with a fan. Kublai Khan officially established the Yuan dynasty in 1271, becoming the first non-Han emperor to rule all of China, and he did it with style, setting up a Mongol-Chinese hybrid court where Marco Polo, yes, that Marco Polo, would eventually show up and romanticize the whole thing. But under the surface, the Mongols kept the Han majority at arm's length. While they allowed some local governance, the Chinese were essentially second-class citizens in their own empire. Still, the Yuan era wasn't all doom and gloom. There were massive infrastructure projects, booming trade across the Silk Road, and a taste of globalization centuries before it became a buzzword. But the dynasty was plagued by famine, corruption, and a general sense of maybe we shouldn't be ruled by guys from the steppe. Eventually, rebellion broke out, and this time, it wasn't a warlord or noble who seized power. It was a former monk turned revolutionary named Zhu Yuanzhang. In 1368, Zhu kicked out the Mongols and crowned himself Hongwu Emperor, founder of the Ming Dynasty. The Ming era was basically China saying, never again, and wrapping itself in a warm blanket of centralized rule, Confucian ideals, and towering walls. Literally, this was the dynasty that restored and expanded the Great Wall into the massive stone snake we recognize today. It wasn't all defense though. Enter Zheng He, the admiral with a fleet so large it made Columbus's ships look like bathtubs. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He sailed to Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, and even East Africa, flexing Chinese naval power and trading gifts like porcelain and silk in exchange for exotic animals and tribute. But after a few decades, the Ming court abruptly decided, you know what, let's burn the fleet and stay home. Why? Because they feared that foreign influence would corrupt the moral fiber of the empire. That's right, they ghosted the rest of the world before it was trendy. The later Ming period, however, wasn't as glorious. The empire grew stagnant, eunuch factions and court intrigue drained resources, the economy suffered, and natural disasters sparked uprisings. Into this chaos marched the Manchus, seizing Beijing in 1644 and establishing the Qing Dynasty. Now, the Qing weren't Han Chinese either. They were were from the northeast, but unlike the Mongols, they worked hard to integrate into Chinese culture. They kept Confucian principles, expanded the empire's borders, and presided over a population boom. Under emperors like Kangxi and Qianlong, China reached new heights in art, science, and territory. But by the 19th century, the cracks were showing. Britain came knocking with opium, and when the Chinese said no thanks, the British responded with gunboats. The Opium Wars ended with humiliating defeats, unequal treaties, and the ceding of Hong Kong. The Qing were still technically in charge, but Western powers were carving up spheres of influence like it was a buffet. Then came internal strife. The Taiping Rebellion, led by a man who claimed he was Jesus' younger brother, killed tens of millions. Not to be outdone, the Boxer Rebellion tried to punch Westerners out of China, but ended with foreign armies marching into Beijing. By 1911, the Qing Dynasty finally collapsed. The imperial era was over. In its place emerged the Republic of China, led by Sun Yat-sen, who wanted democracy, but got warlords instead. And just as things seemed to stabilize, a young communist named Mao Zedong was taking notes. Cue the Chinese Civil War, the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek versus Mao's communists. Interrupted briefly by the Japanese invasion during World War II, the conflict resumed and ended in 1949 with Mao proclaiming the People's Republic of China. The nationalists fled to Taiwan, and China officially entered the age of communism. What followed was dramatic. First came land reforms, then the disastrous Great Leap Forward, which turned collective farming into collective famine. Millions starved, but propaganda kept rolling. Then came the Cultural Revolution, a decade-long purge of tradition, intellectuals, and basically anyone who owned more than one book. After Mao's death in 1976, China pivoted. Under Deng Xiaoping, the country opened up economically while staying authoritarian politically. Socialism with Chinese characteristics basically meant embracing capitalism in a communist uniform. The results? Explosive economic growth, manufacturing dominance, and cities that went from rice paddies to megacities in a generation. But progress came with tension. Tiananmen Square, censorship, surveillance, and territorial disputes. Modern China walks a tightrope between global superpower and domestic control freak. So after thousands of years, dozens of dynasties, and more civil wars than you can shake a jade scepter at, China is still standing, still evolving, still one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, and all of that started with a river, a bowl of rice, and the stubborn refusal to stay conquered for long.